Hello, and welcome to another program of Social Cohesion in Action. As we were bringing you these programs, we were looking at various topics as it relates to the work of the Department of Social Cohesion, Culture, Youth and Sport within Ministry of the Presidency. I am Isan Hall, the Project Officer within the Department of Social Cohesion. Today's topic deals with racism in the context of Guyana. With us is Mr. Will Campbell, a psychologist, trainer, and lecturer of the University of Guyana, and Ms. Natasha Singh-Lewis, our program coordinator within the Department of Social Cohesion. They're here to discuss this trending topic at this time. Here is Ms. Natasha Singh-Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Easton Hall. Mr. Campbell, today we are here to discuss something that is a topic that is very exciting for all of us in Guyana. We are going to talk a little bit about racism in Guyana. Understanding racism in Guyana, so we will define our discussion within the context of Guyana. We'll try to touch a little bit on how divisions weaken us, diversity as a strength, the quest for understanding, leadership and responsibility. Hopefully within that discussion, you will be in a better position to talk about racism, and hopefully we will have some behavior change as a result of this program. Mr. Campbell, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we go into any further discussion, let's talk a little bit about racism within the context of Guyana.
All right. Generally, racism is where you have discrimination, antagonism, prejudice against a particular group based on their race or ethnicity. And very often that racism is against a minority group, a group that is considered minority within the whole society. And in Guyana, this is not much different. I mean, the definition holds the same. It's where you decide that a particular group is necessarily bad because they are members of that racial group, or they should be marginalized for some reason. They should not have access to certain resources. They should be treated a certain negative way just because they belong to this particular group. So that, in a nutshell, I believe, is a working definition of racism.
So we wanted to get that out of the way first, so you understand what we're talking about when we refer to racism. Now, the Department of Social Cohesion, we have, throughout the last 4 years, been taking our diversity education training to all 10 administrative regions, to every sub-region. We really want to talk to people in the communities. I remember from one of the trainings, we particularly talked about two things. We wanted, when we were meeting with the teachers, the social studies teachers, we wanted to draw to their attention, there's a difference between race and ethnicity. And you took them back to the question of what is race and what is ethnicity. Share a little bit of that for us.
All right. So race is more of a biological construct. It refers to your genetics. So I could be, for example, let me use a different example. I could be Latino and be white. Okay. All right, so I could be racially white, but ethnically Latino, because ethnicity refers more to the culture of a particular group rather than the biological makeup. So there are Black Latinos, for example, because they grew up in that culture and they speak the language, they cook the food, they do the dances, etc., but they are in fact of African origin. So their race is different from their ethnicity. So ethnicity is more a function of culture, while racism is a function of biology.
Thank you very much. That is very enlightening for most of us and for our viewers. I hope that really put things into perspective. Let's talk a little bit about how division weakens us?
All right. We all know the common adage, united we stand, divided we fall. And if we are going to fight against each other, if we decide that only what I feel is right or only what I feel is valuable or valid, and so I marginalize the others who are supposed to be building a country with me, then my country is going to be weaker. So if we have a situation here, and by the way, race for a lot of us is not something we want to talk about in public, but I really believe that these are conversations that need to be had. So pardon me, please, if I, I take off the kid gloves a little bit and I say it as it is. So if I decide, as a black Guyanese of African origin, that only black people should get up, only black people should have access to resources, that other people have to step back and give black people a chance. What happens is the values of quote unquote black people gets, those values get attention. The things that are important to black people get attention, and then the rest of my country is left to, without resources, without support. And how am I building a country with only half its population? I'm using those fractions loosely here. So if only half of the country benefits, then half of the country suffers. And you can't build a country with only half of its people. So we suffer when we subscribe to those divisions and that kind of partiality. There are other ways in which we suffer as well. For example, Guyana is a multicultural, multi-ethnic society. And if we only advance the cause of one ethnic group, then the other cultural contributions are ignored. Then we can't really say that we are multicultural if you're just promoting the culture of one group. Yeah. And that is not helpful for tourism, for example. People come to Guyana because they hear that here you get a multiplicity of cultures, you get different kinds of food, people want to come for that. Yeah. If we marginalize some peoples and we assume that only one kind of food is suitable for visitors, then we deny people of that. We deny ourselves of attracting people who want to see a broader spread. Then there are some things there are some strengths that are more pronounced in one group than in some other groups. Those strengths are pushed on the side if only one group is advanced all the time. And so I think it is important that we all come together, we bring our strengths together, because when we are divided, we are in fact weaker.
Excellent. As you shed light on what weakens us, I remember the conversation we had with the social studies teacher in Mabaruma. They were from Mabaruma and their riverine areas nearby. And what stood out at that session is how they identified themselves. We all know that Mabaruma is predominantly an indigenous community, but it's actually a mixed community too.
It is, yes.
And what we perceived some persons to be black or some persons to be indigenous, they actually identified themselves differently.
Right.
And so that's something, when we talk about racism in Guyana, we really need to enlighten ourselves. I would have casually walked by and identified that one particular teacher as a black teacher, a teacher of black origin. But when she stood up and was asked the question, she identified herself as an indigenous person, even though when you look at her, she appeared more of a black person. Right. And so because of situations like that are enshrined in our people, because of our geography, and we don't get to live with some of our brothers and sisters in the hinterland, we do not feel, we don't share that same experience.
Right.
And many times for us, and this is a conversation that we need, I believe, from a social cohesion perspective in Guyana, we need to start having this conversation. We need to stop putting it on the back burner.
For sure.
We need to have this conversation to our viewers and our listeners. This is our first episode in discussing racism from a social cohesion perspective, and we certainly will be having many more discussions. We want you to come back to listen, to learn, and we are hoping that after these sessions, we will see some interaction. We are hoping for behavior change. Mr. Campbell, let's talk about strength as a diversity. You said that we are multi-ethnic, multicultural. Let's talk a little bit more about our strength. What are the good things? What are the positives that come out when we are, when we show our respect for others, when we appreciate our strength?
Okay, so in response to your question, I want to go back to an earlier question about how it weakens us. If I am prejudiced against other races, then what I do is I close my mind off to what I could learn from people of other origins. And so I go through life with a single, narrow perspective. Whereas if I had taken time to reach out to my brothers and sisters of different races, I would learn some things that I could not otherwise learn. There are some things that you cannot learn except you connect with certain people. And when I connect with people of other races, I gain perspective that is different from mine, because the reality is I can only see from where I stand. And that person is able to see something from a different perspective because that person has some differences. And the other, my other friend, my other connection of a different race sees it from a third perspective. And so I'm able to benefit from all these different perspectives. And one of the things about having different perspectives is it empowers you to make better decisions. Because when I can only see it from my own narrow perspective, I mean, you've had this experience. All of us have had the experience where
I've had many.
you were sure that your idea was a great one. Because all you could see was what you could see. And when you put all your all your marbles in a row, I don't know if that is a, when you lined up everything that you knew, you were sure that this was a great idea. But for some reason, you threw it out to someone else. And that person was able to say, well, or maybe they ask you a question and then you realize that what you were working with was not enough to make a proper decision. So even our decision making benefits when we gain different perspectives. And we can only gain different perspectives if we allow ourselves to be open to different viewpoints. And we will have different viewpoints if we come from different ethnicities, or we come from different races. We will see things differently. And so in order to benefit from those perspectives, we have to connect with one another. We have to, put aside what we know alone and be willing to listen to someone else. That is one way in which we become stronger as a result of coming together. I want to, because food is my favorite subject, or maybe eating is my favorite thing to do. Let's talk a little bit about food and how Guyana is a nicer place because we have all these differences. As far as I know that I'm not purely of African descent, but as far as I know, and I may be wrong, I don't have Indian blood. But I love Indian food. It's terrible. I love Indian food. And I cannot imagine what my life would be like if I did not have roti, or if I did not have dal and rice. So you know my
Yes.
you know my situation with dal and rice. So in addition to foods that are considered Afro-Guyanese foods, all of us, regardless of what ethnic group you're from, are now able to enjoy foods from different ethnicities. In fact, we have dal and rice, which is considered Indian food,
Yes.
and there are some people who would say you get black dal and you got Indian dal.
Yes.
What
Yes.
happens there is the black chef adds flavors that are Afro-Guyanese, that are distinctly Afro-Guyanese to the dal. And so now you have varieties. There you have different ways of cooking, of cooking dal. So we you know, it flavors the pot then, so to speak. Just having people of different origins come together, put their ideas together, put their perspectives together, put their cultures together, put their economic ideas together. And when we do that, we get an experience that is so much richer.
Mr. Campbell, in not within the context of racism, almost every Guyanese would be talking about, in particular periods of time, we would talk about there is strength in unity, we need to work together, we need to come together. But in groups, we understand there are dynamics in working together. What are some of the things that are important for us to work together? What are some of the values of a person? And I want our viewers and our listeners to understand that within the context of our different ethnicity, our different religion, our different communities, but there are certain things that are core to a human being. If we are to work together, these are the value system we should have, or these are the characteristics, these are the things we should be, we should have, or we should know about.
Now, if I were to take a poll in pretty much any community of people and ask them what are the things that are most important to you as an individual, you would find that regardless of where people come from,
Yes.
regardless of their ethnic backgrounds, regardless of their race, regardless of their geography, there are certain things that would come up. You would hear things like health. You would hear things like access to resources. You would hear things like education, religion, family. And I think that if we're going to work together, we need to acknowledge that underneath all of these perceived differences, well, I shouldn't say perceived, because some of our differences are real. A lot of our
Yes.
differences are real. And we should acknowledge that and embrace it.
Yes.
But underneath all of that, we all want the same things. All of us want to live comfortably with our families. All of us want to be healthy. All of us want our children, well, most of us, want our children to be educated. You know, all of us want to have access to resources. All of us want to be comfortable. We want to be loved. We want to be accepted. We want to be respected.
Yes.
And so if we could but take a moment and pause and acknowledge that deep down inside we're essentially the same. We might have different ideas about how to get these things, or in some cases what those things mean might be a little different. But at the end of the day, we all want the same things. If we could acknowledge that, then we're able to better work together. I think fundamental to working together too is seeking to understand one another. And so if we take time to get to learn about each other and why we do the things we do, then we're better able to accept one another and we're able to work together. Those are some of the things, but I think that fundamental is understanding that, you know, underneath your light skin, underneath my light skin, the same red blood. We all want the same things.
A greater understanding of what racism is, a greater understanding of who we are as human beings, a greater understanding of who we are as Guyanese within our context of being multicultural, multi-ethnic. We need to start having this conversation of racism in Guyana. Mr. Campbell, tell us a little bit about leadership and responsibilities. From a social cohesion perspective, our work plan is very structured. So we meet with the NDCs, the municipalities, and the region. So those are 3 levels within each region that we meet with to talk and to share all of our information, to have our workshops with. And we have done that across all 10 administrative regions in Guyana. And it's continuous and it's ongoing. So when we had our consultation, our strategic plan, people said to us, if you don't talk with the political people, if you don't teach them social cohesion, if they don't behave in a certain way, we will not have social cohesion. For our viewers, I would like to remind you that at a municipal level, at the NDC level, at the RDC levels, those are all political people that we are talking to. Those are the people that we hope to have behavior change at a community level. We are yet to have the conversation in a major way with the higher level leaders. But Mr. Campbell, tell us about leadership and their responsibility in relation to racism in the context of Guyana.
All right. We take our cues as to how we behave from our leaders.
Yes.
It's a general statement, of course, and there are exceptions. But generally, we take our cues as to how we should behave, how we should relate to one another from our leadership. And so leaders have a responsibility to, I believe, ensure that the messages they send are the right ones. I think that is of extreme importance. So if I am a leader, then there are people who look to me for leadership. There are people who pattern their own values based on the values that I portray. Then it behoves me, I believe, to ensure that my leadership says from the outset inclusion, acceptance, tolerance, cohesion. It is important for me to say that. And sometimes we have to be very deliberate about how we do this. For example, let's assume that I'm a teacher in a classroom. And I am, children in particularly in primary school, if you get singled out to do something for teacher, that raises your status a little bit. So let us suppose I'm identifying 4 children in my class to do something for teacher, whatever that something is.
Yes.
I can be deliberate in selecting so that different racial groups are represented. And when I do that, I am communicating to those children who look to me for leadership that you can have black leaders, and you can have Indian leaders, and you can have indigenous leaders, and you can have Portuguese leaders. Leadership can come from anywhere. I'm treating these people as equals. So I think that, that is one, well, it's a small example, but that is one way in which, as leaders, we can, just be deliberate about it. One of the things I did as a teacher, if I could use an example, is I kind of made it a point to single out those groups that were marginalized when I was doing things like that, so that, they get a better sense of worth, and others get to see that these people have worth as well. So I think that as leaders, these are some of the things that we can do. There is the whole issue of equity, so that there are groups in our society that have been traditionally marginalized. I think that those people need more help than those that are considered majority groups. And so, we talk about equality, but equality is not going to fix this.
Right.
So our policies from the policy making level, we have to look at equity. We have to look at the issue. We have to look at those people who've been left behind and maybe provide the resources that will help bring them on par with other groups. So leaders have a really important responsibility. And I think that on a very personal level, not everybody will agree with me on this, but on a very personal level, I think that we are selfish people. We tend to look out for ourselves first. So for example, if I'm a leader and I'm looking to extend my time in office, I'm looking for re-election.
Yes.
The temptation would be to focus just on retaining power so that whatever I have to do, I will. And so if it means appealing to people's racial fears,
Yes.
then I do that. And I think that as politicians, that is something that we should, well, I'm not a politician. I think that politicians should stay away from things like that. We have to put country first.
Yes.
We have to put country first. Another thing that I believe politicians can do is to encourage these conversations. Encourage these conversations. It's not a comfortable conversation, and so we don't like to have it. And very often we pretend that it doesn't exist. There's something that we say that I don't agree with, that our racism, we only become racist at around the elections time. I don't
That's
agree
not
with that at
true.
all.
That's
I don't
absolutely
agree
not
with it
true.
at all. So I believe that between elections,
Yes.
we should have the conversation so that next time around we're better at it. And I believe that if our leaders can initiate these conversations and encourage these conversations with a view to bringing people together and helping us understand our sameness.
Yes.
We already know how we're different, and so we don't need to emphasize that too much.
Yeah.
But we need to look at how we are alike.
So, Mr. Campbell, in wrapping up, if you had one message for the Guyanese people as we discuss the topic of racism in the context of Guyana, what would be that message?
I have to think about this a little bit. I think it is important for us to judge people based on their merits. So I don't assume that somebody is lazy because they are this color, or that somebody is untrustworthy because of that color, or somebody is unhygienic because because they belong to a particular group. What I should do is give people a chance to prove themselves. So in this case, what I'm doing is treating you as another human being rather than somebody who's of a different ethnicity.
True.
So we start by treating people based on their merits. I think it was Bob Marley who said that a man should be judged by the content of his character rather than the color of his skin. So we need to go in that direction. Judge people based on their character, and then you're going to realize that not every Indian man is this, and not every black woman is that, and not every Amerindian is this, and not every you're going to find that there are good people in every group and subgroup, and there are bad people in every group and subgroup, and you can connect with members of all of this group if you focus more on the content of their character. I don't believe, in closing here, that we should be colorblind.
Right.
I don't believe in being colorblind. I think we should recognize that we are different.
Yes. Our
There's
identity.
nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with embracing the culture that is associated with your race or your religion. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, you must realize that the other race, the other color, the other ethnic group is just as valid, is just as valuable as your own. It's not inferior, and just as worthy of respect and love and should have the same access to resources that you would want for your group.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. This has been my first discussion, our first discussion from social cohesion on the issue of racism. We certainly touched on a lot of things that we need to talk about a lot more. You would have mentioned two types of leaders, the politicians and the teachers. There are leaders, but we also want to talk about racism within the context of religion. Yes, it does exist, and it does exist in Guyana, and we want to talk a little bit more about that. But that's for another episode of talking racism within the context of Guyana. To you, our viewers, please visit our Facebook page, our website that you would see scrolling down on the screen for more information on social cohesion in Guyana. Thank you.